Hopefully this video will give you some perspective. I want to talk about one of the most crucial decisions you're going to make when it comes to storytelling, your point of view. The perspective or point of view that a story is told from has nearly as much impact as the setting that it's told in or the characters that take part in it. Understanding POV is critical to getting your story right. Problems can crop up when you switch in between POVs, perhaps without noticing, or if you write your story from a particular point of view that doesn't fit with the narrative. There's no single decision that will have more of an impact on your story than the POV it's written in. So we're going to spend some time discussing it. For today, I want to take a step back and talk about why perspective is so important, why we need it in the first place, and what kind of effects it can have on the story. In future videos, we'll go through the different types of perspectives in more detail, where they fit, and their strengths and weaknesses. But in case this is new to you, here's a quick rundown of the different types of perspective. First-person perspective is told directly from a character's viewpoint, using pronouns like I, we, my, and me. Second person places the reader directly into the story and uses pronouns like you or your. And finally, third person uses pronouns like he, she, they, and can be divided into third limited and third omniscient. Perspective essentially comes down to defining who the narrator of a story is. In a broad sense, this is either going to be a character who's taking part in the story, or it could be a disembodied narrator, as is the case in the third-person perspective. Perspective is one of those things that every single story has, even if you try to strip it away. Something or someone needs to be telling the story to the reader, so naturally that's going to be what the perspective is from. Fundamentally, the point of view introduces bias into how your story is told, and different points of view will have different biases. Not only because when you're in the POV of a specific character, you are only seeing what that character is seeing and not anything else, but also because everything they do see gets filtered in some way. The POV that you use introduces some amount of bias into how your story is told. Except in very, very rare cases, the narrator cannot be entirely unbiased in their delivery of information. It's always going to be colored in some specific way. That's just the nature of storytelling. The story needs to direct and manipulate the reader's attention in specific ways in order to make them pay attention to specific things. Now, this is a feature and not a bug. We want the story to be biased in a certain way, especially in cases where you're writing from a first-person perspective when the story is told directly by a character in it. In these cases, we often get a version of events that's heavily filtered by that character's motivation and their views, which makes sense because the story is told from their point of view. If your story has a specific theme or message that you want to get across, then it's naturally going to be biased towards getting that theme or message across. You can use this bias to your advantage to have things like an unreliable narrator, or to establish the likability of different characters, to define what characters the reader should be rooting for. In stories with unclear lines between good and evil, where you perhaps have a lot of morally gray characters, it's often only through perspective and the bias that gets introduced through perspective that the reader can gain any insight into who they should root for. Perspective also in many ways defines the rules of the story for the reader, specifically around what information they get access to and what characters they are following. For instance, first-person perspective is usually, but not always, linked to one specific character, so the reader knows that they are always going to be following that character and only seeing and experiencing things that that character experiences. In third limited, where we often switch between different characters, for any given scene, we only see the perspective of one character. The reader will know that they can't get the thoughts or views of any other character in that scene. This brings up one of the most important points about point of view. Once you pick one, stick with it. The most common problem with point of view is inadvertently switching between them. This can cause confusion for the reader, it can break the flow of the story, and it's just generally not a good thing to do. You'll see different advice here. Some people will say to stick with one POV for an entire story. Others will say that it's okay to switch between chapters or even between scenes. I'm of the pick one and stick with it group, if only because I've never found that switching between perspectives has really added anything whenever I've seen it done. And by switching perspectives, I mean switching the type of perspective, like jumping between a first person and a third limited, not necessarily switching between characters. The one possible exception here is the frame story, which is common in first person perspective stories, but we'll talk about that when we cover first person perspective in a future video. In those future videos, we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of the different perspectives, what stories they fit in, and what rules you should consider when you're using them. For now, though, we're going to talk about nothing, because this video is over. Next time, we'll start digging into the different types of perspective in more detail. I don't know which one it would make sense to do first. Anyway, until then, I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. I post new videos every Wednesday and lately very rarely on Friday. I should almost stop saying that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.